Hello and welcome. This is NTA Tuesday Live, and I'm Cyril Stober. The Ninth National Assembly bicameral legislature is expected to be constituted in June at the expiration of the 8th Assembly. Already, the race for the leadership of the National Assembly has begun in earnest, with horse trading, intrigues, and heightened campaigns. The play-out, analysts believe, is getting more interesting, perhaps in righting the wrongs, or as some see it, a time for true democracy. But what is likely to be the interest of the next leadership, especially in the fight against corruption, elimination of waste, upholding the rule of law, and quality legislation? Now, with the governing party, the All Progressives Congress, APC, having a majority in both chambers of the National Assembly, what should be the expectations of Nigerians? What's the take on calls for speedy passage of bills and smooth relationship between the legislature and the executive? Well, much of what will shape the 9th National Assembly would depend on the quality of leadership to come. And these are some of the issues we'll be taking a look at tonight on NTA Tuesday Live. But first, let's get to see this report by Lami Ali.
The legislature is the hallmark of democracy, vested with the responsibility of making laws, appropriating amounts for the running of government, and oversighting government agencies, among other constitutional mandates. The 8th Assembly of Nigeria's bicameral legislature will in a couple of weeks wind up to pave way for the inauguration of the 9th Assembly. A key question by stakeholders is, what should be the agenda of the 9th Assembly?
The 9th Assembly should first of all think of taking and approving economic and developmental measures that are in accord with the thinking of the executive, with the thinking of the ruling party, and in accord with what the people really want. What the people really want now is employment, improvement in the economy, fighting corruption, and there are so many bills and measures on these matters which are pending before the 8th Assembly.
In terms of training, in terms of our capacity to perform, even in terms of this global e-parliamentary operations, certainly we will expect the 9th Assembly to be more positioned than the last one. And I also see in the membership of members coming into the 9th Assembly, a cream of wonderful and intelligent Nigerians who have come from various angles of life, who have various dispositions from different professional backgrounds that I believe they are readily available to put in their best towards making the 9th Assembly a wonderful one as well.
There will be several issues of national interest and concern that the Parliament will have to address. Some of them are historical, and many of them will become contemporary and unfold as events, pass. But for me, personally, the most significant area of interest and concern for me is getting our budget process right. The whole idea of budget spillover, budget approval spillover into the year of operation is not good for us as a country. It doesn't speak well of us as a country to be deliberating on a budget for a financial year during the financial year for which the budget is meant. It's a huge national embarrassment.
A record 219 bills were passed by the 8th Assembly, some of which have been assented to by President Muhammadu Buhari. Observers see the constitution of principal officers as the first hurdle of the 9th Assembly, to be followed by the review of outstanding bills, one of which is the amendments of the Electoral Act.
Completely repealing the present Electoral Act and re-enacting a new Electoral Act, which will take into account all the observations that have been made by the previous judgment and perhaps judgment that will be made by the different courts in the present election, by the tribunals, by the Court of Appeal, by the Supreme Court.
The emergence of the leadership was also a controversial one. In the end, you have a situation whereby the Assembly, the National Assembly, is being led by an opposition head as against the normal practice. So this time around, with the steps the party is taking and with the kind of commitment members have to really do what they're expected to do, I expect to see an assembly, especially the House of Representatives, that will work in tandem, hand in hand, with the executive arm of government in order to promote the policies and programs of the APC administration.
Lami Ali, NTA News.
All right, that report sets the tone for tonight's discussion. Let's go ahead and introduce our guests. We'd like to welcome to this program Daniel Hassan Bwala. He's a legal practitioner, author, adjunct lecturer, and member Lincoln's Inn, London. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Let me also introduce Honorable Mohammed Kumalia, former minority leader in the House of Representatives during the 5th National Assembly. He's also a lawyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Cyril.
Okay. We'd like to welcome Honorable West Idahosa, also a lawyer, policy expert, and a former legislator as well. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
All right. And joining us from our Port Harcourt Network Center is Amuda Kanike Abiodun, a senior advocate of Nigeria and a professor of law. Prof, thanks for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure meeting you, also being with you tonight, and I'm grateful that you give me this privilege.
Right. Okay. Well, as usual, we acquaint you with the procedure. At the appropriate time, you can get to be part of the discussion in the studio. The platform will be on your screen. You take advantage of them. And for those calling in tonight, we always say this. When your call gets through to the studio, do us a favor, turn down the volume of your TV set, reduce the volume. That's the way to avoid the hurlback or echo. And the best way to know that your call has been passed through to the studio is you'll see your name on screen. Once you see your name on screen, that means your call is through, direct to the studio. So go right ahead, make your comment, ask a question, keep it straight to the point so others can also get on the platform. And don't waste too much time on the greetings. Just go straight to your point. And whatever issues you raise, our guests here will be willing to comment or discuss them in greater detail. So once again, welcome to NTA Tuesday Live. Let's begin. The 8th Assembly is winding down, and expectations are high as people look towards the 9th Assembly. But first, let's start from the premise of looking at the quality of the legislations, the work that the 8th Assembly did. What's your assessment of that?
Well, thank you for having me. Especially if you try to judge what they have done and you rank it with the provisions of the Constitution regarding the expectation from the legislature. You look at Section 4. That is the threefold dimension of the work of the legislature in a democratic government: to make laws for peace, make laws for order, and make laws for good government. In other words, they are making laws for national security. In the last 3 to 4 years that we have had, because of the problem that led to the emergence of the leaders of the National Assembly, as a country, we actually, in my view, have not had the opportunity of enjoying the lawmaking processes of the legislature in this term, which is why some of us are particularly concerned about the 9th Assembly. And we're hoping that we'll have the quality of leaders that will look into the provisions of the Constitution and do what is required to bring the deliverables of democracy to the Nigerian people.
All right. Honorable Kumalia, we'll put the same question to you, assessing the 8th Assembly, the quality of legislation that emanated from the chambers.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much, Cyril. One of the fundamental legislations that the National Assembly passes, like a ritual, is the Appropriation Act, which is one of the most fundamental legislations. And the process of passing the Appropriation Act in the last 4 years, 3 years, that passing the 4th one now, has been a bit problematic because of perception issues, especially in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the two arms of government. Whereas on the one hand, the executive has always believed that they have been elected to deliver on the promises they have made, and therefore they have responsibility for making proposals for the budget to the National Assembly, which is true. But at the same time, the legislature has the responsibility of looking into the budget, scrutinizing it, and making sure that it is passed in a manner that is defensible. You know, so this relationship management is very key and important. And the issue of leadership comes into play. That is the key dramatis personae, the president and his team on the one side, and the leadership of the National Assembly as, you know, personified by the Speaker, the Senate President, and the principal officers on the other. That relationship management is key in trying to smoothen some of the rough edges. It is a contest of authority, of power, of influence. I'm Speaker. I want to have a road project in my constituency. The Ministry of Road or whatever has not proposed it. And, you know, I believe I've also made that promise to my people. It should be there. So, you see, there has to be some kind of background information. And that leads me to the issue of engagement between the executive and the legislature well ahead of even the budget process, even at the level of conceptualization of the budget, because the legislators themselves are also elected representatives of the people. They campaigned, they made promises. And therefore, you cannot expect them to come and just rubber stamp. Where did we get the term rubber stamp? You know, and why is every legislature everywhere in the world does not want to be called a rubber stamp assembly? It is because you are expected to do some work, the work of scrutiny. And therefore, that, to some extent, has been a bit problematic, and it is important for going forward into the 9th Assembly for this particular role to be smoothened. It's not going to be absolutely smooth. It's never going to be 100% okay. There's going to be a contest between the two parties all the time, but it should be done in a manner that can be managed, and at the end of the day, deliver what is expected to the people, because the objective of this relationship is to ensure that the goodies of this process is delivered to the people by making sure that infrastructure and what have you is delivered to Nigerians.
All right, thank you so much. And Honorable Westi Dahosa, from your perspective.
Well, the truth is, I credit the 8th Assembly for a couple of laws. Significantly, I know that they tried to deal with the problem of the electoral law, which is running through the heart of Nigeria's democracy. It got to the point where it was stuck on the table of the executive. They also tried to deal with a couple of amendments, significantly with the pre-election issues. You know that legislators get there and spend 4 years prior to that pursuing their mandate or trying to safeguard the mandate and end up doing nothing. So the streamlining of the pre-election issues by amendment to the Constitution was a major concentration effort for lawmakers to face their job. But beyond that, I think the 8th Assembly spent too much time on quantity of the laws rather than the quality of the law. They were busy reading out numbers. The question is it the number of laws that you roll out that matters, or the laws that you roll out that turn out to become the instrument of social re-engineering? I didn't see much of that. There was so much insecurity in the country. There was so much hunger in the country. There was so much despondency in the country. And yet, you didn't see the lawmakers running through the mills trying to get some stability. It's not just about thinking about the presidency and lampooning the presidency. We need to talk about the typical American gets angry with Congress when things are not going right, because that is the primary constituency for his complaints. I didn't see much of debates on these matters. I just saw them glossing over it. And I hope that in the 9th Assembly, the quality of those who are coming will determine the type of leadership that they have. Because if you say leadership over who? These are first amongst equals. We are talking about people equally elected, not a group of Boy Scouts coming to be led by a scoutmaster. That's not the point. And this is key, so that you don't make too much fuss about the leadership of the National Assembly. For me, it is the membership that is most critical.
Okay. All right. Let's go over to Port Harcourt Center, and where we have Professor Abiodun. And we'll ask you the same question. Put in perspective your thoughts about the 8th Assembly. What do you expect of the 9th Assembly? And particularly the quality of legislation that we saw coming out of this Assembly.
Well, as for me, the real issue behind this matter, which we are discussing today, is that the 9th Assembly should have it at the back of their mind that they are not coming there probably to stir some problems. What I mean by this is that they are not coming there probably to gather publicity from any members of the public. The whole essence of their coming there is to make sure that appropriate legislations are made, and then it's for the benefit of the masses. Then there should also be a relationship between the executive and the legislature. What I mean by this is that before these bills are presented to the House, it is better that it is discussed at the level of the executive, so that between the executive, they will have rubbed minds on some of those key legislations that are presented or to be passed. I also believe that the legislatures should be able to also meet the executive in terms of those key areas they really want to end or pass, so that in case they are sending it to the president, it would easily be signed into law and not just sent to the president, and the president send it back and say there are some areas of laws which they have made which is not practicably possible. These are the 8th Assembly has narrated. The 8th Assembly has been bedeviled with. Then the 9th Assembly has to be very careful about it. But we are not talking about legislatures alone. We also need to talk about the executive. What I meant by this is that the executive must link maybe the senior special assistant to the president in legislatures have to be more in tandem with this good relationship so that there will be rapport. Nobody will ask the legislature to be a rubber stamp, but also nobody will ask the legislatures to always be at loggerheads with the executive. What will happen at the end of the day is that the masses will suffer for legislations that either passed, not signed to law, or legislations that are passed but having one or two problems that does not meet the realities of the time. These are problems that need to be nipped in. And that's why, for now, that the party, the APC, probably have more of their members in the assembly. They should be able to have leaders that will be able to coordinate the assembly properly. Then that would the presidency, the executive, to also be able to work. There should be good rapport and unity between the executive and the legislatures. That will make sure the democracy we are asking for works better.
Let me stay with you a little longer, Prof. While appreciating the fact that politicians go out there and campaign on the platforms of their parties and whatever programs their parties have, is it not expected that in the legislature, where national interest matters, party affiliation pales and a more nationalistic look is upheld?
As far as that situation is concerned, issue of party affiliation does not come in as such. But if it's a political party who is also willing to develop the society, who is willing to develop the country, then the agenda must be in tandem with what the people expected. But the legislature should also make it a point of duty where the executive head, probably they are not going in tandem with what they expected. Then they should be able to, in a subtle manner, not in a way as to make sure they make the executive to see them as if it's a fight for all. There's a way you can call somebody to order and he will appreciate you. There's a way you call somebody to order and he would see you as sick. So in other words, there should be a subtle way of talking to each other between the executive and the legislature. Somebody can say, this is the bill we have. Then you can say, this area needs to be clarified. See our reason why we are saying this should not be done. If you don't, there's going to be a problem. Just like some of the lawyers in court would tell you, that some senior lawyers will come and begins to abuse them. Why are you doing like this and all the rest? He does not appreciate it. Then you call the gentleman and say, sorry, you are not well dressed. This is what you have done. Please go and jail. You would now be happy that the way you actually talk to him is in a subtle manner which he can appreciate. But where all is, what kind of legislation is this? What kind of bill is this? This is nonsense and all the rest. They will never appreciate each other. So national interest is more important than party affiliation. But where a party is also thinking national interest, then every other person should also float with the party that has national interest. But sometimes there may be need to correct a political party when they are derailing from where they are. But there must be a way to correct. If you don't correct someone very well, and it seems as if you are antagonistic to such person, he may not be happy or appreciate what you are saying. And then the same thing with members of the public. They may not also see you doing your work well. They will think that you are antagonistic to the executive, or the executive being antagonistic to the legislature. So there must be a way to each other. Otherwise, the essence of the national interest will be defeated.
We'll return to you in a moment, but Honorable Idahosa, must it necessarily be a power tussle? Who can flex muscles or who blinks first? And how much of negativity did we see coming out of this past experience with regards to the constant, at one point in time, the constant squabbles between the legislature and the executive?
Well, first, we have borrowed a robe that seemed to be so big for us, the presidential type of democracy, which we have gone to take from a very old democratic nation, and then we are now trying to fit that on our very slim political structure without thinking about the baggage that goes with the system. This is where we have a problem. Now, if we were a more realistic country politically, you may have found us operating a more Africanized type of parliamentary system, which allows you to sit in parliament as a minister. Not only do you conserve funds, then you are able to report to the leader of the country directly. You are also in a position to make the laws as he wants it directly. So you play that double role in one seat. But what we have now is you have a presidential system where the president has his entire structure completely different from the legislative structure. There's so much separation of powers in what we see. Now, the other point is you have political parties that upon which platform people get elected. The caucuses in the National Assembly of the parties, very weak. There is no strong document belonging to the caucus itself with which it hopes to help the political party that upon which platform it came to power. So you just have a group of people saying, I am PDP, I am APC. They are sitting there. They don't understand the manifesto of the party. As a group of people, they don't meet, they don't caucus under their roles. They don't talk about the committee structure. They don't talk about the sectors of the government. They don't even know how to complement the executive. So the problem then becomes the struggle limited to separation of power, separation of power. What does that mean? There is no place in the world where separation is completely separate. There is always that connectivity, and the lack of communication is the biggest problem we are having here. You have executive liaison officers who do not know how to communicate. It doesn't mean they should write apology letters or love letters to each other. Then you have also legislative leaders who also do not know how to communicate. I will always remember our first tenure. Kumalia was there. We ran against a very obstinate president. I think that they managed the crisis very well. They were very prolific thinkers. He was minority leader at the time. And we had issues always resolved because they thought so well through the process. So I think that rather than think that it's an unusual situation, it's not a problem. Bill Clinton, when he came here, described it as a creative tension, which takes place for the good of democracy. So it's not a setback. What we should be thinking about is getting the right people, you know, into the offices.
And that brings us to the next issue of how much of a distraction is this process of getting people, the right people to run? How much of a distraction is that? Have you noticed that, particularly towards the end, the end part of this administration, this term, this tenure, relations became so frosty that quite a number of processes suffered as a result of the back and forth bickerings between both, the executive and the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, again, that brings us back to the issue of the fundamentals. That is, understanding the role of the institutions themselves. We're, like Honorable West the House has said, we're operating a presidential system of government where the concept of separation of powers is one of the key features. But you see, on the one hand, there is separation of powers, or if you like, the independence of the arms of government. But they are not totally independent. They're independent, but they are also interdependent. Because you cannot operate in a silo. Now, as a parliament, your function is that of lawmaking. And a corollary to that is the function of oversight of what the executive does. Because the parliament doesn't spend money. You appropriate. It is a function of the executive arm of government to spend the money. But you have the duty of ensuring that the money that you have appropriated is spent in the manner, spelled out by the appropriation legislation. So, you see, that gives the power of oversight. Now, coming back to the focus of your question, it is important for the legislature to realize that the executive arm of government are partners in progress. Because if you want to, remove yourself from the executive arm of government, or rather the executive wants to remove itself, seeing itself as the government, that the legislature is not part of the government, then you have a problem. Because the government is constituted of the three arms of government, each one of them with their respective responsibilities. Now, if you understand the role of the institutions on the one hand, the executive knows that it is their responsibility to spend the money of the country on our behalf as appropriated by the National Assembly. If you know that that is your role, and you appreciate that there is an organ or an agency or an institution that has the responsibility of checking how we spend this money. Once in the executive arm of government, you understand that. You will not see the legislature as meddlesome interlopers, as mere busybodies. Because most often you see some ministers in the executive arm of government question, especially like you said when we came in 1999. We were all young men, and we had a president that was like a father to all of us. And we were seeing like, who are these small boys? Why are they asking us questions? Because, for instance, there's someone that has been a military president, in the military head of state, chairman of the Armed Forces Ruling Council. All the generals say sir to him. And here are some young men, they call themselves West Idahosa, Kumalia, Galinaba, and so on. Who are these people, by the way? And they're asking us questions on how we run this country. But again, fortunately, some of us knew our onions in terms of at least the textbook approach to, how the concept of separation of powers and some fundamental understanding of the Constitution itself. So to that extent, we were able to stand up to the call of duty, to our responsibilities, and say, well, as much as yes, you are a father to us, but we have a duty